and welcome to the second lesson of the series How to Create in 72 Hours a serious game that hits the mark. The topic of this lesson is the creation of a solid game backbone. In this lesson I'll talk about the design process and how to do it efficiently, having a very little amount of time. Second, the game personality, what it means and why it's so important for the projects to outstand in the market. Third, the study we have done to understand how the coronavirus diffusion works from a mathematical point of view, creating a credible behavior in the game. The last one is the importance of task management in a game jam project. It saves you from not finishing a game in time. The design process is the creation of rules, systems, and interactions that allows the player to perceive a precise experience playing the game. This process is very important for a game jam project in which you don't have time to reiterate the game multiple times, so you have to design very precisely, imagining in your head the systems functioning from the beginning to spot what could work and what could not. We have used some techniques to face design problems very efficiently. The first one is the tight design approach. This game design approach means that you have to create few rules, in this case the breadth, to keep the game simple to play and to understand, but with a good depth to create a lot of dynamics and variety, resulting in a game simple to play but difficult to master. The second golden rule of the tight design is what I call the multi-purposes mechanics. Every mechanic and element that you add in the game must have at least two meaningful uses in the game. If there are mechanics that don't fit this rule, they add breadth to your game, not affecting the depth. So they add useless complexity, not giving enough value to the player. An example is the Super Mario jump. You can kill enemies, break bricks, jump to overcome obstacles, avoid bullets, collect coins. So the jump is a multi-purpose mechanic that creates a lot of dynamics. The last rule for a good tight design approach is to avoid to add systems that create exponential growth and difficulty to your project. I want to use luck as an example because even if we put attention to this rule, we made a mistake. We started with the idea of having cards that represent people. Each card is composed of different fields, a situation, two choices, and the people's name. This structure was not too complex and we thought it was enough to communicate the experience of dealing with real people to the player. We understood that this structure was not enough thanks to the feedback gathered during the development, and we added additional information like people's job, the age, and the consequences feedback that appears after every action made. This choice added an incredible difficulty to the project because for every new card we have to do a lot of studies, create a lot of text, translate them in Italian and English, and to keep the game balanced. We made this mistake because this type of game is totally new for us. We experimented because it was one of our objectives. So making mistakes is legit, but you have to ask yourself how to solve them even when the project is finished, so you can learn from your past games. In this case, the solution was probably to cut the text when possible and use icons or reusable visual elements to avoid a lot of translations. Another part of the design process is the creation of a simple and solid core loop. The core loop is the set of actions that the player repeats in your game. It's very useful because with a clear scheme you can communicate the flow of your game to all the team members. In our example, the core loop starts with a planning phase where the player reads the situation, reads the choices, and decides what is the best action to do based on his stats. Then there is the action phase. The player makes the swipe to confirm a choice, and the last one is the result phase. The player receives a reward or a punishment if the choice increases or decreases the stats. So with this loop you can talk about the game very precisely with the other team members, and it also helps you in the design choices because you have a scheme that sums up your game phases. A very important rule is that every phase of your loop must communicate your experience using something. Otherwise the game lacks on communication and the player is not able to perceive the entire experience. In our case, our focus is to make the player learn something at every phase of the loop. We thought we were in the right direction with this loop, but in the next lesson, in which I will talk about the importance of asking for feedback, I'll show you why this core loop is fragile, what was the problem, and what we've done in order to fix it. The next subject of the design process is the suspension of disbelief. It is an intentional avoidance of critical thinking or logic in examining something surreal. In a serious game, it is fundamental, otherwise you perceive the game only as a game and all the learning process is compromised. We wanted to create a game that does not feel like a game. In fact, all the game elements are very different from a game. It feels more like an app or a social network in which there are real people, because in this way the player perceives better the feeling of choices have a weight. Imagine if we were using a very cartoonish style, it would be very difficult to achieve the suspension of disbelief. At this point, a very big problem arose for us. We needed a lot of images of people to communicate the interaction with real people feeling, but we have little time available in order to search for pictures that don't infringe the privacy or for copyright and royalty-free pictures with good quality, with people of different ranges of ages, from child to retiree, so it was a very big problem. The first solution was to avoid using real people pictures, but we quickly discarded this idea because it means to hand draw all the pictures using an abstract style that would destroy our feeling of interacting with real people. So we did a quick research and we found a very cool software made by NVIDIA called This Person Does Not Exist, that with an AI generates procedurally people's faces. So this fixed all of our problems, and the photos were always with the same resolution and quality, so it was amazing. This choice allowed us to create a ton of faces very quickly. This is a little part of our Drive folder with all the faces. The last design technique to apply during the game jams and could also be useful at your daily job in some phases of the design is making docs like game design documents is mostly useless if you are not sure about what you're writing and if you have a little amount of time available. The documents are a very subtle thing because a well-done document is efficient, but an imperfect document is almost useless because the reader spends a lot of time trying to understand what you wrote. So using our first form of communication, the verbal one, is the right choice at the jams. This technique is useful also at your daily job because I see a lot of designers that write docs before everything else. If you spend energies on making a document about something that you haven't prototyped or tested, you are focusing on the wrong thing. In my opinion, making docs at jams is useful only for one case, to write down formulas and other difficult stuff to remember, so you keep the brain free and you don't have to remember this information. So you use the document as an extension of your brain to remember stuff when required. We used in fact a document only for a short description of the basic elements in the game, so every team member could read and remember what is an element and how it interacts with the others. And most importantly, we used the document for the formulas because they are difficult to keep in mind. Now I want to talk about the game personality, a very underrated thing, but it matters a lot to create a game that remains printed in the people's minds. I start with an example. If I tell you to try to remember a first-person shooter in which when you move, time moves, probably a game pops up in your head. If it's not enough, I add the graphic is all white and gray with red-colored enemies. The game I'm talking about is super hot. So, personality is every element of your game that is only yours, and it is used as a hook for people to remember your game. We focused a lot on this aspect because at the start of the jam our idea was too similar to Reigns. Our pitch was like a game in which you swipe left or right in order to make choices and affect stats, but it's identical to the Reigns pitch. So we wanted to create personality in each aspect of the game because people have different tastes. Someone is attracted by the graphics, someone from the math beyond the game. So the objective is to put personality in every part of the game, maintaining and supporting the game experience. From a design point of view, we wanted to focus on the seriousness, on the meaningful decisions, on the virus behavior, and on the secondary mechanics that change the card's behavior based on the situation. From an artistic point of view, we wanted to create a very social network style that creates empathy in the player because every card is like a real person. For the audio, we wanted to create a very anxious theme, but with the feeling of hope to keep the player engaged. So after the process of creating the game personality, if I pitch you our game as a serious game about coronavirus in which you swipe left or right in order to decide what actions the people have to do affecting the coronavirus behavior, it is a lot of different from Reigns and generates more interest because it sounds new. The most important thing during the creation of the game personality is to not dilute your game experience. Every time you add or change an element in your game, ask yourself, does this element help my game to communicate the experience? If the answer is yes, you can add it. Otherwise, you have to find something else that creates personality, supporting also the experience. The next subject is how we approach the coronavirus behavior from a mathematical point of view. We understood very quickly that we didn't have enough awareness about how a virus diffusion works because you have to understand very deeply a topic to be able to communicate a credible experience to the players. So we started to search for information online. We found a very well-made video that explains what are the formulas that represent the diffusion of the coronavirus and what are the variables that regulate the system. I leave the link of the video in the lower part of the slide if you are interested in learning more about this topic. The most important information was the virus uses an exponential curve during the diffusion, and there is a growth factor that is like a multiplier that establishes the new contagions compared to the ones of yesterday. There is a very important thing to apply when you make a game like this. You have to create a credible experience, not a replication of the reality. So in our case, our focus was not to replicate the virus perfectly. We wanted to create an abstraction, a very tight one, that was credible because it uses the correct variables linked to our game rules. So we created an association between the growth factor and our 4 game stats. When a stat increases, the growth factor decreases and vice versa, because it is a credible representation of what happens in a real situation. So this system is very simple to understand for the player, because the stats affect only one variable, the growth factor, so everyone perceives the experience without difficulty. To achieve this result, you have to act like a filter of information, keeping only what is important for your experience. We filtered like the 90% of the information of the video because they would generate useless complexity that ruins our game accessibility. After these parts about the game, I want to talk about an approach that is considered boring and time-consuming but is your safety. The subject is called task management is your best friend. The task management is very useful also in a game jam project because if you do it in the right way, you free your mind and you don't have to spend a lot of effort on trying to remember things, saving a lot of energies that you should spend in other important activities. Task management is the only way to understand if you are on schedule or not with your project, so if you want to finish a good game in a jam, you are forced to do it. We approached the task management in the most minimal way. We created a very basic sheet in which we wrote all the tasks that came out in our minds at the start of the project. Remember to apply the rule form follows function, because you don't have to create a beautiful sheet with headliners or with cool formatting. You have to create something usable and clear because time is ticking. This is our structure. In the columns there are the roles and in the rows there are the tasks. This structure is very usable because everyone looks at their column and the tasks are not all together, so you have a visual representation of the number of tasks for each role. A key rule to create something clear for everyone is to use their previous knowledge. For example, we use the color coding to explain the status of the tasks. White for to do, yellow for in progress, red for blocked, and green for completed. Another example is the tasks at the top of the columns have more importance than the lower ones. Even without explaining these rules, the members use them because they are the standard. Listing all the tasks at the start of the project is only the beginning. You have to keep the list updated because during the development tasks change and you have to make decisions, so some tasks could be removed or delayed. The last important technique is to communicate to the other members every change applied to the tasks. If you finish them, if you have a problem, if you have to add a task not planned at the start, because everything has an impact on the others and only with communication you spot problems. This is our final task list of the project, so as you could see there are more tasks compared to the initial one because you can predict everything at the start of the project. Using all the techniques that I've showed, you will have a green task list like ours, so your project will be finished and you will be very happy about it. This second lesson, how to create a solid game backbone, is finished. As you can see, we're digging deeper and deeper in the game creation process, explaining all the techniques that we've used. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about tangible things like how we created a system that puts in communication Unity and Google Sheet in order to design the cards on Google Sheets and import them into Unity only with a click. We're going to talk about how we created the basic mechanics of the game, like the swipe of the cards, showing you the engine and some parts of the code. And the last subject is how we approach the art direction and assets creation without an artist in the team. See you in the next lesson.